Hey all, welcome back to Shane by Jack Schaefer. I'm Jesse McCarthy, as always, reading the book aloud to you. So, last chapter was insane. Literally, one of the homesteaders is dead. He was shot by a man that Fletcher had hired to kind of threaten the homesteaders to, you got to get off this land. Um, the man who was hired was Stark Wilson, carries a pistol on both sides of his hips or on both hips. I don't know which way grammatically that would be best, but this is a serious gunman. There's no way that any of the homesteaders or these somewhat like farmers are going to be able to compete with a man like that. I think I gave the comparison last time or one of the times of like, oh, I like to play around and wrestle with friends or a younger brother. And now you're going to go and wrestle or fight a UFC champion. Not going to happen. So it's a shame that Ernie Wright got sucked into kind of talking trash with this guy Wilson, and then it led to a literal fight with guns, and uh, he was killed. Ernie was killed. So now the question was, are they going to back down? Is Joe going to back down? Is the Starr family going to back down? And it looks like they're standing their ground because what would life be like if they gave up at this point? So they're not going to go after them. I'm not going to go, oh, Fletcher, I'm going to kill you. But what are they going to do? And that's the interesting thing that's going to come up in the next chapter. What are they going to do? Let's see if we get a solution to it. Things are going to get intense. That's my prediction. Um, let's hop in. The morning sun brightened our house and everything in the world outside. We had a good breakfast, Father and Shane taking their time because they had routed out early to get the chores done and were waiting to go to town. They saddled up presently and rode off, and I moped in front of the house, not able to settle to any kind of playing. After she bustled through the dishes, Mother saw me standing and staring down the road and called me to the porch. She got her tattered old Parchesi board and she kept me humping to beat her. She was a grand one for games like that. She would be as excited as a kid, squealing at the big numbers and doubles and counting proudly out loud as she moved her markers ahead. Parchesi is some kind of game. I've never played it myself, but let me try to find a picture for you. Kind of like a board game or something. When I had won 3 games running, she put the board away and brought out 2 fat apples and my favorite of the books she had from the time she taught school. Munching on her apple, she read to me, and before I knew it, the shadows were mighty short, and she had to skip in to get dinner in, and Father and Shane were riding up to the barn. They came in while she was putting the food on the table. We sat down, and it was almost like a holiday, not just because it was not a work day, but because the grown folks were talking lightly, were determined not to let this Fletcher business spoil our good times. Father was pleased at what had happened in town. Yes, sir, he was saying as we were finishing dinner. Ernie had a right good funeral. He would have appreciated it. Grafton made a nice speech, and by Godfrey, I believe he meant it. That fellow Weir had his clerk put together a really fine coffin. Wouldn't take a cent for it. And Sims over at the mine is knocking out a good stone. He wouldn't take a cent either. I was surprised at the crowd, too. Not a good word for Fletcher among them. And there must have been 30 people there. 34, said Shane. I counted them. They weren't just paying their respects to Wright, Marion. That wouldn't have brought in some of those I checked. They were showing their opinion of a certain man named Starr, who made a pretty fair speech himself. This husband of yours is becoming quite a respected citizen in these parts. Soon as the town gets grown up and organized, he's likely to start going places. Give him time, and he'll be mayor. Mother caught her breath with a little sob. Give him time, she said slowly. She looked at Shane, and there was panic in her eyes. The lightness was gone, and before anyone could say any more, we heard the horses turning into our yard. I dashed to the window to peer out. It struck me strange that Shane, usually so alert, was not there ahead of time. Instead, he pushed back his chair and spoke gently, still sitting in it. That will be Fletcher, Joe. He's heard how the town has taken this and knows he has to move fast. You take it easy. He's playing against time now, but he won't push anything here. So think about this. Fletcher probably thought, man, I just had one of these guys shot. the town's going to be scared and all the rest of these homesteaders are going to quickly give up their land. But it seems like the town is pulling together and saying, we don't like this Fletcher guy. I mean, they're not explicitly saying it, but the fact that everybody went out for that funeral of rites, that's a statement, right? Father nodded at Shane and went to the door. He had taken off his gun belt when he came in and now passed it to the lift, the rifle from its nails on the wall. And now passed it to lift. And now passed it to lift the rifle from the nails on the wall. So he's picking up his rifle. Holding it in his right hand, barrel down, he opened the door and stepped out on the porch, clear to the front edge. Shane followed quietly and leaned in the doorway, relaxed and watchful. Mother was beside me at the window, staring out, crumpling her apron in her hand. There were 4 of them, Fletcher and Wilson in the lead, 2 cowboys tagging. They had pulled up about 20 feet from the porch. This was the first time I had seen Fletcher for nearly a year. He was a tall man who must once have been a handsome figure in the fine clothes he always wore, and with his arrogant air and his finely chiseled face set off by his short, cropped black beard and brilliant eyes. Now, a heaviness was setting in about his features, and a fatty softness was beginning to show in his body. His face had a shrewd cast, and a kind of reckless determination was on him that I did not remember ever noticing before. It's interesting how your choices in life, your character can start to transform your body. Like he used to be this strong, alert, kind of like arrogant guy, and now he's starting to get a little flabby, fat. Anywho, Stark Wilson, for all the dude look Frank Torrey had mentioned, seemed lean and fit. He was sitting idly in his saddle, but the pose did not fool you. He was wearing no coat, and the 2 guns were swinging free. He was sure of himself, serene and deadly. The curl of his lip beneath his mustache was a combination of confidence in himself and contempt for us, basically looking down on the Starretts like they're nothing. Fletcher was smiling and affable. He was certain he held the cards and was going to deal them as he wanted. Sorry to bother you, Starrett, so soon after that unfortunate affair last night. I wish it could have been avoided. I really do. Shooting is so unnecessary in these things. If only people would show sense. But Wright never should have called Mr. Wilson here a liar. That was a mistake. It was, Father said curtly. But then Ernie always did believe in telling the truth. That's like an underhanded diss right there. I could see Wilson stiffen and his lips tighten. Father did not look at him. Speak your piece, Fletcher, and get off my land. Fletcher was still smiling. There's no call for us to quarrel, Star. What's done is done. Let's hope there's no need for anything like it to be done again. You've worked cattle on a big ranch, and you can understand my position. I'll be wanting all the range I can get from now on. Even without that, I can't let a bunch of nesters keep coming in here and choke me off from my water rights. We've been over that before, Father said. You know where I stand. If you have more to say, speak up and be done with it. All right, Starrett. Here's my proposition. I like the way you do things. You got some queer notions about the cattle business, but when you tackle a job, you take hold and do it thoroughly. You and that man of yours are a combination I could use. I want you on my side of the fence. I'm getting rid of Morgan, and I want you to take over as foreman. From what I hear, your man would make one heck of a driving trail boss. The spot's his. Since you've proved up on this place, I'll buy it from you. If you want to go on living here, that can be arranged. If you want to play around with that little herd of yours, that can be arranged too. But I want you working for me. Father was surprised. He had not expected anything quite like this. He spoke softly to Shane behind him. He did not turn or look away from Fletcher, but his voice carried clearly. Can I call the turn for you, Shane? Yes, Joe. Shane's voice was just as soft, but it too carried clearly, and this was a little note of pride in it. Father stood taller there on the edge of the porch. He stared straight at Fletcher. And the others? He said slowly. Johnson, Shipstead, and the rest? What about them? So those are the other homesteaders in the area, right? Joe's neighbors, somewhat friends. They'll have to go. Father did not hesitate. No. I'll give you $1,000 for this place as it stands, and that's my top offer. No. The fury in Fletcher broke over his face, and he started to turn in the saddle toward Wilson. He caught himself and forced again that shrewd smile. There's no percentage in being hasty, Start. I'll boost the ante to 1,200. That's a lot better than what might happen if you stick to being stubborn. I'll not take an answer now. I'll give you till tonight to think it over. I'll be waiting at Grafton's to hear you talk sense. He swung his horse and started away. The two cowboys turned to join him by the road. Wilson did not follow at once. He leaned forward in his saddle and drove a sneering look at Father. Yes, Sterrett. Think it over. You wouldn't like someone else to be enjoying this place of yours. And that woman there in the window. He was lifting his reins with one hand to pull his horse around, and suddenly he dropped them and froze to attention. It must have been what he saw on Father's face. We could not see it, Mother and I, because Father's back was to us, but we could see his hand tightening on the rifle at his side. Don't, Joe. Shane was beside Father. He slipped past, moving smooth and steady down the steps and over to one side to come at Wilson on his right hand and stop not 6 feet from him. Wilson was puzzled, and his right hand twitched and then was still as Shane stopped, and as he saw that Shane carried no gun. So Joe, who had his hand on the rifle, the hand stiffened almost. Not, it didn't, but stiffened almost as if he was going to lift that rifle. You can imagine how fast Stark Wilson would have been if Joe started to move that up like he was going to shoot. But Shane runs over it so close, Stark Wilson's actual horse, which is a pretty intense move to somebody with 2 guns on him. Shane looked up at him, and Shane's voice flicked in a whiplash of contempt. You talk like a man because of that flashy hardware you're wearing. Strip it away, and you'd shrivel down to boy size. And he's like, take off the guns and let's fight for real, and you'd be whooped like a little child. The very daring of it held Wilson motionless for an instant. Father's voice cut into it. Shane, stop it! The blackness faded from Wilson's face. He smiled grimly at Shane. You do need someone to look after you. He whirled his horse and put it to a run to join Fletcher and the others in the road. It was only then that I realized Mother was gripping my shoulders so that they hurt. She dropped on a chair and held me to her. We could hear Father and Shane on the porch. He'd have drilled you, Joe, before you could have brought the gun up and pumped in a shell. But you crazy fool. Father was covering his feelings with a show of exasperation. You'd have made him plug you just so I'd have a chance to get him. Mother jumped up. She pushed me aside. She flared at them from the doorway. And both of you would have acted like fools just because he said that about me? I'll have you two know that if it's got to be done, I can take being insulted just as much as you can. Peering around her, I saw them gaping at her in astonishment. But Marion, Father objected mildly, coming to her. What better reason could a man have? Yes, said Shane gently. What better reason? He was not looking just at Mother. He was looking at the two of them. All right. Well, I hope it came across how insanely intense that situation would be if you were in it. Because I mean, literally, that Stark Wilson could have pulled his gun and shot at one of them. Um, so things have gotten kind of crazy. Uh, Again, we're talking about going from an enjoyable time on a farm, building up a corral, like fences, to you almost being killed on your own property by a man that Fletcher hired. Just nuts. And if you can see, the question is, should you as a person get worked up with somebody making fun or talking trash on your wife, on somebody in your family? And the suggestion here, I don't know if you got it, but was that if Joe were to be killed by Stark Wilson, he's basically saying, what a shame, Joe. If you were to be harmed and this house would to become ours, and your wife would become ours too, which is really a nasty, nasty comment. Um, could you take that comment if you were the husband? Or if you were the wife standing there, could you take that comment? Would you run out and say, hey, screw you, and get crazy and risk getting into a fight with a deadly man? Interesting questions. Anywho, um, man, I don't know what's going to happen. We're going to see what happens in the next chapter. Before then, though, let's get a face in here. So let's get the face. I want the face of Joe. I really want to try this, actually. I want the face of Joe when this guy says to him, "Oh, basically, let's make sure you don't get yourself in trouble and this house becomes ours and your wife becomes ours." Right when that is said to Joe, you know, I don't know if Shane wasn't there. I don't know if Joe would have lost his cool and acted. I'm not sure, but whatever the case, I want Joe's face the moment he hears that from Stark Wilson. Okay. And that was like a quick burst of mine. I'm thinking it's like rage, and you can't really, rage is just like a moment. Uh, Anyways, hopefully you got that face, and hopefully you're putting up something of your own. All right. Looking forward to talking with you guys next time. We'll see what happens. Adios for now.